Hi, I'm Old Sneelock. Welcome to another episode of Old Sneelock's Workshop. Today I'm going to talk about dies and the difference between a good die, this is made by the Handy Company, and this one, which is made by China. I don't know what part of China or who in China. Nobody to complain to because I could write China and say your die sucks. But this doesn't suck as bad as it could. This one works quite well. These don't need to be exactly the same length, but I want to have them as close as I can, just because it makes it work better. And this one comes out to an even 4 1/4. That's a good number. I can live with that. No point cutting both of them if I don't need to. So I marked this one at 4 1/4, and then we cut it off with a hacksaw. Now, yes, I know I spent all that time and effort making the bandsaw work out there in the garage, and I could go out there and cut it off with a bandsaw, but doing all that walking just to cut off a piece of 1/4 inch stock, okay, I don't like hacksaws, but not that bad. Now you'll notice I'm putting my hand on the front of this saw. It's because this saw doesn't have a whole lot of lateral stability. The handle being round lets you rock it back and forth. Putting your hand out here guides it to go straight up and down. Now, I'm not pushing down on this, I'm just using it to hold it stable. Pushing down on it just causes your blade to curve and wear out faster. Okay, now I have 2 pieces of rod with a left-hand thread on one end. Both of them checked out. Left-hand thread was real bare, as you saw in the last video. It was hard to cut, and trying to get the darn thing to do what I wanted to, I spent 2 days. 2 blasted days. On top of a month just getting the tooling ready to hold the die because it was a special size. We'll discuss the die in a little later in the video. But right now, I'm going to chamfer the end of these and get them ready to thread. I just want to knock off the burr. Make the end look a little nicer. No one's ever going to see it. It's going to be captured inside the heim joint on this end and the turnbuckle on this end. This end's going to get a 1/4 28 thread on it to match the heim joint. This one has a 1/4 20 left-hand thread. So I have to get the die out. Having threaded and cut these to length and ground off the ends, gave it a little starting bevel so that I can get the die started on the piece. This is a cheap die set. I mean, it is a cheap die set. The thing I used most out of it is the thread gauge. Came from Harbor Freight, like a lot of the things that I bought cheap, because I didn't have money. Just didn't have money to spend on projects like this. I was doing other things with my money. So I used the thread gauges. Before I had a different set of dies and taps, I used these. And as a matter of fact, I used this little tap here to put the set screw thread in this, because it was the only one I had. So when it's the only one you got, you use it and make do. Kind of like trying to make the left hand threads on these. This is the only die I had, so I made do. This is a crap die. It's actually worse than these. These only have 3 holes in them, and they're fairly small in relationship to the thread. This one has huge holes in it, so it thins out the web of the die to the point where there's no support for the teeth, and they snap right off. It's a shame. Could have been a good part, but they cheaped out. They made a very small die and sold it for a lot of money on eBay. Well, relatively a lot of money, considering it doesn't work. Anything you spend for something that doesn't work is too much. So, let's get set up and thread the ends of these. Scratch the whole thing. We're gonna compare the Chinesium National Fine 28 thread to the Handy National Fine 20. I'm going to do that on a piece that's not an actual item that I want to use. I'm going to just take the end of a rod and put a thread on it. Nothing fancy. I'll try the Chinese first and then the Handy. Just bevel the ends. Now every die has a starting side. There's a larger flat on it, and that is a area that cuts the end of the rod to size. It presets the root diameter of the thread by cutting away the outer portion of the steel. Some dies, they cheat a little bit. This end is a little small, it's hard to start. Now, this kind of die, you have to push down on the die to get it to start. It's just the nature of the beast, especially with these cheap dies. So you want to have this land on the top. That means you want to have the starting side pointing out the bottom, so that when I'm pushing on this die to get it to start, it doesn't just slide out. The set screw is only there to keep the die from rotating, and they quite often don't do that very well. Now, I'm going to be using my standard quick ease. I have another cutting oil out in the garage that I use that works just as well, but down here in the shop I have this one can, and that's what I use. So we'll put a little on the die, and it will run down the shaft and lubricate the shaft. At least that is the hope. This die handle is really awkward. It's really awkward. It's hard to get started. So I'm going to cheat and use a better die handle. This die handle has a guide on it. A little collet on this side. You loosen up the 3 screws, spin this collar, and it acts like a chuck. So I can turn this until it sits up tight against the shaft, tighten the screws. I want to have it spin on the shaft. I don't want to set it so that it's so tight that it won't spin. It's just there as a guide. Moved a little bit on me. Probably should tighten all 3 screws while it's on the part. There we go. This one I'm going to set up opposite the other threading tool. Because this is a guide, I want to have it go on first. So I'm going to set this with the starting threads going towards it. It's always sumpy. Okay, now that should help me start this die, which is a difficult die to start with. Anyways, I'm pressing down about as hard as I can on that. Short of getting some kind of mechanical advantage on it. It does not want to start. Okay. Gave that one a shot. Let's try the handy die. Okay. Well, let's see. I'm going to give both of these rods a little more lead in. I'm going to start the handy first. At least that is the plan. Well, with the soft jaws in there, they're spinning. We'll risk putting a few marks on the rods and set these up like this. The extra lead in is cutting better. I don't need a full inch of thread on this one. I only need about a ½ inch, because all it's got to do is go into the heim joint and lock. Fine thread cuts slower, more turns per inch of travel. Same thing, starting end goes into the die stock. A little bit of oil. This die is loose in the die stock. Falls right out. Without the set screw, it wouldn't stay. The handy die is a very close fit. It goes, but it's not just a rattle in. You gotta click it. See how nice and tight it fits? That helps with this chuck on the other side, because the collet is trying to hold the rod centered on the die. And if that die is not centered in the die stock, the collet is actually pushing it off to the side. So there's an advantage to having this die the right size. Now let's check the fit on the threads. This is the Chinesium die, and this is the handy die. this heim joint rattles around on there. On the handy die side, very little movement. This one, that tells me this pitch diameter is a little small. The major diameter of the internal thread has to match the external diameter of the internal thread so that you get a good fit up, so the threads actually engage solidly. Now in my case, working with just a treadle rod, I doubt I'll ever put enough strain on that to strip out 3/8 of an inch of even loose thread like this one. But because I can, I'm going to rethread. I'll cut off this small thread and rethread it with a handy die. Because, you know, if you're going to do it right. If you have any suggestions for a new video, questions about today's video, or any of the other videos on the channel, just drop a note in the comments. You know I read them all. Thanks for watching. This video is not to be viewed by anyone under the age of 13 in the U.S. or 16 in the European Union, without the express written permission of the parents or legal guardians of the underage person. Such written permission must be on file at the local government entity in charge of enforcing the rules and regulations established by the FTC. Anyone violating these terms is admitting by default that they hold harmless the owners and operators of this channel. Any and all questions should be addressed to your local branch of the FTC.